Hi, welcome to the Open Therapy Institute. My name is Andrew Hartz. I'm the founder of the Open Therapy Institute, and we have an open house tonight. So, just so that people know, there's about a 20-second delay between when I talk and when you message me. So if you chime in the chat, it'll just take a little bit of time before I see it. But we're trying something a little bit different here with this live stream. We thought it'd be an opportunity where I could take some questions for people who come in person, but people who can't make it and are busy could see the video later. Um, there's basically the focus of the open house is to summarize the Open Therapy Institute, describe what we do, explain our offerings, answer questions. I also just want to say for everybody here, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You just hit the bell button, you ring the bell, you subscribe, then you'll get our podcast, which comes out about every week, any other updates on YouTube. I'd say follow all of our social media. We should post that. That should all be posted in the chat below the video. We're having trouble posting it in the comments, but it should be in the chat. It's also all at the bottom of the homepage of our website. So if you go to opentherapyinstitute.org, at the bottom of the homepage, you'll see Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, and our Substack. And sign up for our mailing list, sign up for our newsletter on Substack too, because that's where we post most of our updates about workshops and stuff. Hopefully that'll all be below the chat when we start. Okay, enough of that. So what is OTI? What do we do? Well, I want to show you a little diagram that will kind of summarize what I'm going to talk about today. This is kind of a summary of the problem and what the Open Therapy Institute does, and then what we hope the results of that are going to be. So for today, this box on the left, biases in mental health care, it includes overlooked issues, overlooked populations, overlooked perspectives, lack of skill with different groups, lack of therapeutic skill with lots of groups, bad practices, and other types of biases. I'm going to start summarizing that. I might spend about 25 minutes going through that. There's a lot to unpack there that people might not be aware of about how many issues and patient populations are being poorly served right now. The second part of the talk, I'll go into what the Open Therapy Institute does. We do accept therapy referrals. I'll explain how you can contact us. It's easy. You just email us or hit the contact button on our website. But I'll explain who's in our group of therapists that we send referrals to, trainings that we're offering for therapists, CE credit trainings for therapists, and then also research and scholarship that we're starting. And then I'll end with kind of a brief summary of all the ways that I think that this can improve mental health care, improve the field, but also really impact the larger culture and potentially facilitate really broader positive change throughout our culture with some of these issues. So that's the talk. It'll probably be about 45 minutes. We'll see how it goes in practice. So let me start here. Okay. So I want to start just kind of outlining. We do have basically a program to outline all of the overlooked issues and perspectives in mental health care, and especially related to psychotherapy. And here are some of the issues, just to kind of give people a sense of the scope of the problem in the field. I guess I'll say, actually, before I dive in, I think some people, probably most people watching this video, have heard about some of the worst practices in the field. You know, therapists maybe explicitly attacking patients for their views, or terminating therapy because they disagree with patients, or refusing to see large chunks of the population because of their political views, like Trump voters. I mean, that's not that rare to know a therapist who would refuse to see anyone who voted for Trump. It's pretty normalized and accepted. But it's also, and there's also things happening in training programs and things where people are taught to bring race into every session and challenge white people about their white privilege in therapy sessions, even when that's not the patient's concern. So I think people have heard about some of the really egregious practices. Those are real. They're a big problem. They're growing. The people who advocate for those practices really think that they're advocating for social justice. So they're very committed to them. And I think especially younger therapists coming out of training have been taught to think clinically through the DEI schema or a social justice kind of schema with their patients. So there are bad practices like that. But I actually don't think it's the biggest problem in the field. The biggest problem in the field are these overlooked issues I'm about to talk about. These are all the issues that we should be addressing and helping people with, but where there's often no research on the topic, little to no research, often no trainings or very few, and often no clinical services at all. Like no therapists or clinics in the country that market themselves as specializing with any of these issues or with a lot of them. So it varies. Each issue is different, but you'll see as I go through them. So just the first issue is to kind of think about how current social dynamics, there's been a ton of social change over the past decade, and maybe two, and thinking about how do those shape symptoms. One example is cancel culture. And again, this is the work of Dean McKay, who told me about this dynamic, which is people with obsessive compulsive disorder who increasingly have obsessions, repetitive intrusive thoughts that they're going to say or do something that will get them canceled. So there are OCD symptoms where, obsessions could be about something sexual or something aggressive or disease or something. And more and more people are reporting OCD symptoms that are explicitly related to cancel culture. And it shows how the cultural forces can be stressors that contribute to symptoms, and they can also shape the content of those symptoms. So you can think about another issue would be social anxiety. If you have social anxiety and now you're at work and there's lots of accusations of sexism, or there's a Me Too moment and anybody who tells a joke gets called out for bias, or men are called for bias. It's a man with social anxiety in that work environment or school environment. His social anxiety could very well latch on to that worry of what if I get accused of uh, sexual harassment, or more anxiety interacting with women because he's worried about getting accused of something. And you could think about the same thing with depression. If you're depressed and now you have to go to trainings at work that attack you for your race or demonize chunks of the country or attack your values or views, I mean, that can contribute to your depression. It could contribute to a substance use problem if that's somebody's issue, an anger disorder, isolation, other types of problems. And people are experiencing this stuff. Not everybody who has workplaces that become really hostile this way, not all of them develop mental illness. But there are people who are at risk, and maybe this leads to symptoms, or maybe it just shapes the content of the symptoms that they already have. But in any case, these people would need to have a therapist who was comfortable and engaged talking about all of these issues. Um, they can't be somebody who's judgmental or takes the other side or wants to scold them for having the reactions that they do. They have to be somebody who's open and aware of what the social dynamics are and how they impact people, not minimize them, not dismiss them, not be oblivious to them. So that's really so there's basically countless ways that sociopolitical forces can shape mental health symptoms. So what are questions that we'd want to know about these topics? We'd want to know, what are new sociopolitical stressors that have emerged that might not have a literature? Um, how do they contribute to mental illness? How do they shape symptoms? What different types of symptoms might people be having, not just with OCD, but with all of these disorders? How do they come into the therapy room? Um, a lot of patients who have these concerns, they might be hesitant to share them with the therapist because they think the therapist is liberal and might not tolerate and might judge or might react in a way that ends the therapy or just isn't productive. So they're often shy. But we also want to know, how do therapists respond poorly? It's not always just the attacking them, oh, you're sexist and racist, get out of my office. I don't know how often it happens in that explicit of a way. More often, my guess is it's just reacting with some discomfort and changing the topic. And the patient gets the impression that this is not a space that's open for this issue. Even if the therapist might even agree with the patient on these issues, but if they're too inhibited, too withdrawn, they're not curious, that it's not going to be helpful. So it's worth thinking, what types of responses do facilitate openness around these issues and what shut it down? Are there interventions that can help? This is another thing. If you're dealing with a real cancel culture, you're at a university where maybe you have a colleague who got canceled for saying the wrong thing or writing the wrong thing. It's not totally made up. And there's a challenge with how to validate the reality of the social environment while also addressing the anxiety or depression or the other issue. So they're tricky issues, and I do think they often need catered interventions that take this stuff into account. And then also, what does this say about the larger culture? Both how people are experiencing the symptoms and why these new social forces are coming into play. There's a lot to think about psychologically there too, but there's many questions about this. Other issues, people attacked for their beliefs. There are a lot of people who they're not worried about being attacked, they are attacked. And they could be harassed if they're in a university or a school. They could be attacked, or especially through gossip. But other ways they might be discriminated against or excluded from certain opportunities because of their views, or harmed in their grades, or depending on the context, they can be ostracized, isolated. Each of these is a little bit different. They're not exactly the same experiences. There's also people who face false accusations of bias. It's really hard if you're attacked for being biased or being racist or sexist to shake that accusation. Somehow, even when they're baseless, they stick. And so even when people are totally innocent, those accusations can live with people. And often the accusers, even if they totally made up the incident and lied about it, they often face no consequences or even get sympathy and support nonetheless, whereas the person who's accused often doesn't get any such support. So these are it's important to keep in mind with all these groups, they often have nowhere to go. They may want to file a lawsuit, they may not want to file a lawsuit, but there's a good chance they're isolated. There's a good chance they don't have any support. And there's a good chance that they need a confidential space to talk through what they're experiencing and actually think about how to respond to their unique situation, given their values and their personality. It's hard to get through these situations all the time, but it's especially hard if they don't have any spaces like that. Another one, people falsely accused of sexual assault and other serious offenses. I have told a really awful story of a friend who was accused of a rape, and the victim, it turned out in the legal proceedings that the victim had totally made it up, and her text messages, she admitted to making up the accusation. So he was acquitted, sued her for defamation, and won, and the accusation still stuck. And this person ended up taking his own life, which shows how much these issues really do impact people and impact people's mental health. There was a famous example of, I think it was a principal in Canada who was really, I think, they attempted to humiliate him in DEI trainings, and he ended up taking his life as well. So, people who have these experiences are often totally isolated, and it's like, where would I refer where do they find a therapist? They can find a random therapist, and maybe they'll be tolerant, maybe not. But there's a need to have a safe resource where they can find somebody they can trust. I'll also say something really quick about number 5, DEI inspired discrimination. A lot of people are just told you're not going to get a job, you're not going to get a raise because you're a white male, or because you're a straight white male or whatever it might be. And that happens a lot. And that's somebody's career. That's their life. And to see a therapist who says, yeah, but you're privileged, so who cares about your career? I mean, the number of therapists that would think that way and would struggle to empathize with somebody whose livelihood was sabotaged explicitly for their race. And sometimes people aren't told, but they can tell. I know a colleague who applied for an academic position, and I think the data were 60% of the applicants were white men, and 0% of the interviews were given to white men, or some. It's like it's pretty obvious sometimes the way it happens. There aren't the legal resources always to sue. And it's not always possible, depending on if it's a public or private organization. I don't know the law around those issues. But even for people who don't want to sue, they need to figure out how to respond. A lot of what they're going to do, how do they connect to community? It's pretty demoralizing. Do they change careers? So the question is, how have these experiences changed? How do they impact mental health? What helps therapeutically? What does this say about the larger culture? On and on. I'm going to move at a faster clip for these next ones because I'm running. I want to get through everything today. People who self-censor, a ton of people are normalized to fairly constant self-censorship about their political beliefs, about their values, or their religious beliefs. It's crazy how common this is. And it would make sense that this would impact mental health. If you can't be yourself, I mean, even if you have a lot of friends, if they don't know what you think, you're alone. If you're at work and you have to pretend you believe something you don't, or get along with colleagues who ridicule your values at work and just pretend like it's normal and act like you don't even have those views because you're afraid. I mean, it's a stressor. And if you're somebody, especially if somebody's facing other life stressors, you could easily see mental health emerging. It's worth thinking about how this impacts different people. And some people get angry about it. Some people get depressed about it. Some people are anxious about it. There's a lot of different reactions. Some people try to tune it out, not always successfully. And then how does this come into the therapy room? Therapists can be oblivious sometimes to how much is being self-censored. Often patients drop subtle hints about things that are pseudo-political issues, like, boy, there's more homeless people around, don't you? What do you think of that? Or they're testing the waters, and they're nervous about bringing up these issues with their therapist. They think they're going to be rejected in therapy the same way they're rejected everywhere else. And you can see how that blockage and that censorship would be a really important part of any treatment. And therapists need to be very aware of it. And if they're not comfortable engaging these issues and facilitating openness around them, then I think that's a missed opportunity for a really transformative treatment. Another thing here too is, what interventions help? My thoughts are, connecting to community is really big. Wherever you are, if you're self-censoring, connect to other people, build relationships. You have to think strategically about when and how and why you speak up. I don't think it's always the right thing for everybody to speak up. You have to think about how you do it. And if you do it in a group on your terms, in an assertive, polite way, that's probably going to be a lot more effective than having an outburst. That being said, I think people do tend to overestimate the risks of not speaking up and underestimate the risks of speaking up. So often they're safer than they think speaking up. And the costs of not speaking up are things that, wherever you are going to school or work, could continue to spiral and get worse and worse. Working with patients who have diverse socio-political views. This is obviously crucial. Conservatives, libertarians, moderates, non-woke liberals. There's lots of people that recent graduate therapy training school program graduates would not work well with. Religious patients, another group, a lot of them don't seek pastoral counseling. They want therapy, but they still want a therapist who can talk about religion and where they can bring up their faith without having a conflict or friction. Um, this is important not just to be aware of why other people might have these views. It's really crucial for the therapeutic alliance. If you don't have, for people who aren't therapists, the therapeutic alliance is basically how good is the relationship between the therapist and patient, and it's the best predictor of therapy outcome. Um, so the better the relationship between therapist and patient, the better the outcome, um, as a rule. Um, and it's really hard to have a strong relationship when your worldviews and your values and your perspectives are so misaligned. Um, and I know people, a lot of people when I was in graduate school, they had never heard a conservative argument on basically any issue. They did not know why anybody would support the conservative view on immigration or on affirmative action or whatever. Like they didn't understand. They'd never been exposed to them. Their education was so left leaning from kindergarten through the end of their PhD that they didn't know. And that's a big blind spot for any therapist who actually wants to work with the full range of people that live in the United States. Another one, I'm going to try to move faster with these, anti-white aggression and bias. This is a really big issue. Obviously, all forms of racial aggression and bias are wrong, and anybody who suffers from any form of racial aggression and bias should be able to get psychotherapy. But now in therapy training programs, people are taught that aggression directed at white people, racial aggression directed at white people, no matter how vicious and how pervasive, no matter what the individual circumstances, it's never racism. And so it matters less and it's not as important. And maybe even it's wrong to talk about it as a legitimate issue or write about it in a way that fully acknowledges the challenges of that experience. Our entire society has an incredibly difficult problem talking about this issue. Um, I, I understand partly why it's challenging, but I think the mental health field needs to be braver about acknowledging that a lot of people suffer from this and it often impacts mental health, and they need therapists who can be attuned and understand this experience. You know, it's violent attacks for sure, but it's also school bullying that is often poorly handled at schools, workplace hostility, which can often be normalized or even facilitated by the DEI or HR department. Um, Normalized insulting language in the culture, just demeaning terms, toxic whiteness, white fragility, white narcissism, even the way, you turn on the sports channel and you think you're going to hear sports scores and it's somebody talking about white people, and even the way they say white people communicates total contempt for that group. Um, People are experiencing this. They see it, they feel it. And I think it's absurd to think that they wouldn't have feelings about it, or that it wouldn't ever be an issue that would come up in mental health care or in their therapy. So the questions are, how does it impact people? How does it shape symptoms? How does it come into therapy room? How does it impact culture? Um, I, I think a lot of white people who experience this have trouble metabolizing the experience. They don't have a kind of psychological immune system to recognize that it's wrong to be racially attacked, even if you're white, and to respond in an assertive, non-hateful, positive, constructive way. I think they really struggle with that. And they're not taught, and it's across generations, young and old. I think they have a really hard time responding the way they should, which is, I think, assertively. Masculinity issues, similar stuff. Um, I'll say, adolescence, if you're taught in school, and I know universities where this is taught, all masculinity is toxic. If you're in cultures that think that and talk that way, that's a big challenge for young men. Um, you have to decide if you've believed that or are brainwashed into thinking that. You have to decide, do I become masculine and be a bad person, be toxic, or am I going to be good and then I'll be emasculated? Because they're mutually exclusive. I can't be good and masculine because masculinity is toxic. So you can see how the culture could really, that's such a central issue for so many young men trying to figure out who they are and find their way in the world. And it impacts dating, it impacts couples. Couples I think often have complicated feelings about gender roles, what they're attracted to in the other sex, how they want their role to look, and they have trouble talking about it, but it can play a role in couples conflicts. And a lot of therapists, I don't think would feel comfortable broaching that issue or exploring that or suggesting that maybe this is a couple that could benefit from elements of gender normativity, and that might be a point of conflict. It's just not something that's taught, and I think most therapists are uncomfortable talking about it if it comes up. Anti-male aggression and bias, also an issue more common than you think. Just to be clear, there is literature on masculinity, but I think it's often from the left-leaning social justice viewpoint. There's not a lot from the other side on these issues. It's worth thinking about all the same issues here too. Um, Other things, I'm going to move more quickly through these. University culture, people are struggling there. Anti-Semitism, especially since October 7th. The mental health field, I'm surprised because a lot of parts of the mental health field that have a lot of Jewish people in them responded in incredibly insensitive and even hateful ways after October 7th. It was really shocking. Um, there are Jewish therapists who are skilled in this area. Patients who want that need to be able to find somebody like that, because they could easily end up with somebody. I think there were stories about therapists who would refuse to see a patient who supported Israel, or they'd kick them out of therapy or challenge them about it. I mean, to think that's not the job of the therapist, and people need to be able to get an attuned therapist on that issue too. Um, okay, gay other groups, gay men and lesbians who dislike parts of LGBT plus culture. I'll give this little anecdote. There's a ton to say here, but just a short thing. So I had a patient years ago who was a young gay man, and he was hanging out more with other gay men, and he wanted a committed relationship. And he was told, oh, gay guys don't do that. We just, it's all open relationships and hookups and stuff. And obviously that's not true. But there are cultural challenges for people, especially if they have more conservative values around sex or religion or politics, where there's challenges. And I think there's less written about that, and definitely less services about that, because the literature in that area seems to be very much ideologically left. Similarly, with people of color who disagree with anti-racist narratives. Both of these groups have a lot of social justice material that's often done as if it's in their name, that a lot of people in those groups disagree with or even despise these views. And there's challenges that are unique and universal in those struggles. And it's just worth having a good literature about what those challenges are and how therapists can be helpful, not oblivious or flat-footed when these issues come up. I'll say when I did have a supervisor once who told me that she saw a patient who was a Black woman who was married to a cop who supported the police and hated Black Lives Matter. And the therapist just wrote it off as internalized racism and would spend sessions arguing with this white woman would argue with this female Black patient, trying to explain to her why disagreeing with BLM was the patient having self-hatred. It's hard to imagine something more counter-therapeutic, really, and unethical, I think. Other issues with gender and sexuality. There's lots of issues that we could talk about here. People who've detransitioned, parents of trans questioning kids, inpatient care for psychotic patients who question. They're often adults, but if they had a psychotic break, um, you know, their care is difficult, and if the trans identity emerges after the psychotic break, um, they don't they might not have a lot of insight into I should wait on this until my symptoms get taken, stabilize. The parents don't have guardianship often. So the hospitals and the providers have a lot of power over those patients. And if they coach the patient or push the patient towards affirming as opposed to waiting, and exploring, that could have a huge, I think that's an issue worth really unpacking, and understanding how common that is, and how it impacts people. Um, Other things, consensual non-monogamy, is more and more common. Um, but there's not a lot of literature about how that might interact with symptoms, with relationship problems. I think, again, a lot of therapists think they always have to be affirming, to the detriment of really thinking critically about what's happening in a clinical way. I'm going to race through the rest of these because I'm running low on time. Political disagreement in families and couples, groups and institutions, really common. People are struggling with this. The mental health field should be leading the way at facilitating dialogue everywhere around these issues and facilitating healing. And it's such a tragedy that so often the field is piling on and attacking people and picking one side rather than being dialectical and facilitating conversations that are productive. That's what we should be doing. That's our job. Another one, mental health costs of DEI. A lot of DEI trainings and programs like it are full of aggression. They're full of all or nothing thinking. They're incredibly disempowering often. And I think it's very likely that they harm mental health of some participants. Left-wing authoritarianism is an interesting one. There's a ton of literature on right-wing authoritarianism and much less on left-wing authoritarianism. And I think that really needs to change. Mental health issues with law enforcement, mental health issues with veterans is another one. A big one here is formulating larger dynamics in the culture. All or nothing thinking, over regulation, fantasies of government regulation solving problems, uh, you know, uh, sociopolitical biases and ideologies in movies, art, and culture. I'll give one example of the movies thing because that's something I'm very interested in. I watched a documentary about octopuses a while ago, and the narrator framed it was this followed one female octopus, and the narration clearly framed this octopus as a strong woman who didn't need a man to fight off predators and protect her young. And it was this very feminist narrative of this octopus documentary. This stuff is everywhere, and people are really bombarded with it. And I think it's worth thinking about how this art impacts people, how art and movies and TV impact people this way, what's happening and why. Other things, conformity dynamics, safetyism. Um, there's so many issues. I can't get through all of these. Mental health costs of masking, psychology of activism. What drives activists? What's the psychology there? Um, E is a big one. The growth of the racial schema. The focusing on race first and foremost, often to the exclusion of everything else. If you teach, you see this in your students. They can read the most beautiful piece of literature imaginable, and the first thing they're going to think is, what's the race of the author? What's the gender of the author? Is it sexist? Is it racist? And that's all they want to talk about. And it doesn't matter how many profound insights it might have into truth, or how beautiful it might be, or how nuanced the psychological portrayals and relationships are. All that, it's just race and gender. There are people that are so preoccupied with that. Dismantling gender, costs of just dismantling gender. I just did a video with Leslie Elliott about that. I'll refer you there. It's on our YouTube channel. false assumptions about mental health and activist discourse is a really important one. A lot of censorship and a lot is rationalized as this is protecting people's mental health. That's not true. Censorship is not an evidence-based intervention for treating mental illness. Um, Another thing, another problem is rationalizing aggression as if you're a victim or if you had trauma, you're allowed to be aggressive to people now. Not true. Aggression doesn't cure trauma. There's no evidence that aggression is a cure for trauma, and it causes other problems. Um, Political bias shapes research in really subtle and complicated ways. I can't go into all of that. I'm going to just race through these. So then there's also the extreme biases of the activist therapists bringing in a preordained ideology around race and other issues into the session. Another one you might see is queering therapeutic spaces. Therapists, couples therapists who want to queer the relationship, inpatient units that want to queer the unit. What does this mean? I mean, I think it's often described in jargony terms that are hard to understand, but basically breaking down gender binaries, challenging gender normativity. These are vulnerable patients who have this ideology. It's not an evidence-based ideology. It's forced on them, often without their consent. They don't consent to being queered. They never signed up for that. But it's happening, and there are places that proudly list it as one of their values. Um, I think explicit political statements. I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff here. If you look for a therapist online in New York and in a lot of places, right next to their name, the first thing you get most of the time is their pronouns. The therapists are not thinking. I think most therapists who do that are thinking, I'm being inclusive by showing people my pronouns and signaling I'm open on trans issues. They're totally aware to the people who they're signaling, I don't get you, I don't agree with you, I don't understand your concerns. There's also the indirect forms of sociopolitical bias. I mentioned some of these: avoiding topics, nonverbal reactions, making assumptions, guiding inquiry towards or away from different topics. And then the big one is E. Even if you are great and really nice and you like people with different views and you want to do good work, they lack knowledge. There's no literature on these. There's no training on these. Everybody's shooting from the hip at best. So it's really even the best therapists who are really great in these areas are often going to lack knowledge because that literature just doesn't exist. This is the last one, other biases that have started to sink into therapeutic practice more: idealizing victimhood, demonizing parents, not acknowledging differences between men and women. Huge, huge, huge issues that kind of have become more normalized, and they're subtler because they're not necessarily overtly sociopolitical values. Favoring certain types of emotionality like tearfulness over humor or activity or things like that. So for all of these issues, we want to know what might contribute to the problem, what creates it, how does it impact people, how can we understand it from different theoretical lenses, how does it contribute to symptoms, how does it come into therapy room, how can we respond better, are there interventions that would help, what does this say about the larger culture? And we want to address this in theory and research, in training, and in services, all three. And so there's a lot more to look at here. If you take a step back from this, it's really like almost every cultural issue that people are concerned about now is on this list. It's really everything. And I think that the mental health field could really provide so many valuable insights that wouldn't just help patients, but can impact the larger culture on these issues. And we want to understand these issues from a cognitive behavioral perspective, from a psychodynamic perspective, from a humanistic or existential perspective, from a family systems perspective. Every theoretical orientation in the field, we should be thinking about these issues and how they impact people. And I think doing this work can really not just help individual patients, but really raise larger cultural awareness about what's problematic about these dynamics. And it can lead to broader social change. So those are the overlooked issues. I went a little bit over time with those, so I'm going to jump right into my next part, which is looking at what OTI does. Um, this is just a graphical representation of the overlooked issues. And this is, I don't have time to go into this. It's on our website, but it's different. Just hearing this, I like this graphic because it shows that these are real people who are struggling with these issues. These aren't just abstract things. These are people, and they really are without resources often. Okay. You saw that. I'm going to go here. Okay. For therapists, if you're a therapist and you would like to get involved, there's basically three ways. Okay. You can join our clinical team. We send referrals to people's private practice. We vet them. There's an application, and we will send referrals to your private practice. That is it only on offer now for people who have a license in SIPAC states, California, or Massachusetts. That's all we're looking for right now. Because there's logistical issues about managing licensure in 50 states. And the only way that we can really do it is to do big states. We already have people in New York, big states and SIPAC states. We want to expand this as soon as it's possible. It's just a logistic bottleneck that we can't manage. We don't have the admin to manage licensures in every state. That's why it's just SIPAC and California and Massachusetts right now. In the meantime, if you become a member, that is what we recommend for everybody who doesn't have one of those licenses. Please become a member. Members get discounts on our workshops. We have CE credit workshops. You will get a discount as a member. You will support our cause. You will help us do work. We're going to have members events for members only where you can meet other people and connect. We might have other offerings. We're still trying to think about how to beef up the membership. We'll also, anybody who reaches out for us for treatment who we can't see on our network for some reason, we will share with members, and we can pass your name along if you're licensed in that jurisdiction and have that specialty or whatever the issue is. The last thing is for therapists, for professionals, register for our continuing education workshops. We have workshops that are accredited by the APA for psychologists, by NASW for social workers, and by NBCC for counselors. They are accredited. If you need one of those accreditations, it is accredited. We have 4 workshops this fall. I'll explain what they are in a minute. You can sign up for both the workshops and the membership by going to our workshop page, opentherapyinstitute.com/workshops, or you just go to opentherapyinstitute.org/workshops, or you just go to opentherapyinstitute.org and click on the workshop button, and you'll go right there. Okay, what does Open Therapy Institute do? We offer therapy referrals to people that we vet and interview who are in our network. And we want to make sure that these are people who can do high quality psychotherapy and who are skilled on viewpoint issues. We also have consultation groups for therapists. People who are in that network attend consultation groups where we can manage quality of care and kind of address issues that are emerging in this field. We also are doing some research and scholarship. We want to do more. We need funding for more research, but we'd love to do studies and get data about patients that might reach out to us, maybe qualitative, quantitative. Our main focus on research right now is the Overlooked Issues Report. That's what I outlined in the PowerPoint just now. All of those issues, we want to write short 1,000-word summaries of all the issues. We've got about 70 issues lined up. We've got about 40 scholars writing articles for us. We want to have a report outlining that. We hope to post those on our Substack. So please subscribe to our Substack. You just go to the website, go to opentherapyinstitute.org, and at the bottom of the page, you'll see subscribe to our Substack, or you can just hit your email in the bar at the bottom of the homepage. But we hope to have those coming out. They're not out yet, but when we hope to have those out soon. Membership. So just like I said before, if you're a therapist, become a member, 10% off all workshops, you join community-only events. opportunities for referrals, and you support our work. And again, we want to grow. My feeling is a majority of patients, what percentage of patients have one of the issues that I outlined in that slide? It's probably a majority of patients. It's a ton of people. They should all be seeing an open therapist. We want to be a premier provider of therapy. We want to be a national provider of therapy to all these patients. So if you become a member, we should have more and more referrals if we're able to do some marketing and get our brand out there. And then we're probably going to want to bring people into our network as soon as we have the administrative ability to do that. We want to expand that. Our workshops. Register now. We won't be able to do more workshops if people don't register and take them. We worked hard to get these accreditations. We've worked hard to get this material together. Just go to opentherapyinstitute.org/workshops. Sign up for all of them. We need everybody who's interested to take these so that we can continue to do work on this. And I would say, don't just sign up for them. Email out our information to others, encourage them to sign up for them, share it on social media, share it on listservs and any message boards and anywhere else where you have people who are therapists to get the word out. We're doing other things. I do a weekly podcast with Leslie Elliott Boyce of the Radical Center. That's on this YouTube channel. It's also on her YouTube channel, where it has more views on hers than on ours, because ours is very new and hers is great. And I like all of her content. But we have a week, every week we're going to be talking about a different one of these overlooked issues. So we've got a lot of stuff there. If you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you'll get those alerts. We also have the Substack newsletter. We have announcements there. We do want to post articles from the Overlooked Issues Project. Hopefully that'll be coming out soon. And then we continue to engage media. We've had a ton of success there. We've been featured in the New York Times, National Review, Free Press. I had articles in City Journal, Discourse, Wall Street Journal. There's a lot of stuff that we've been doing, and you can follow us. This is we'll post this in the comments afterwards, but please follow us on all of our social media as well. That really helps us when you see our content, like it, share it, repost it. That helps us get the word out to providers to join so that we can build a bigger community and support each other and build an institution that will last in this area, which we intend to do, and get the word out to patients. There is a place where you can go to find an attuned therapist. Go to the Open Therapy Institute. And as our volume increases, we do want to bring in more and more therapists, not just the SIPAC folks, even though that's where we have to start now, like I said, for logistical reasons. These are the 4 workshops we have. Sociopolitical bias in mental health care. I'll be speaking at this one, actually. Craig Frisbee is going to move to a different time later. People said I should be in the first workshop, so I'm doing that. But we're going to talk about broad issues with viewpoint competency and how therapists need to be attuned in this area, where bias is in training, where skill with sociopolitical viewpoints comes into play in clinical practice. I think that'll kind of be an overview in a way of the Open Therapy Institute project and why we think this is needed. So it'll be really, really critical to kind of orient people to this work. Our second workshop is about self-censorship, how to approach it clinically. We're going to talk about the mental health benefits of speaking up as opposed to censorship. We're going to talk about how this comes into graduate training, especially of therapists. How can you learn to be a therapist in a censorship culture? Our whole field is about helping people open up. And yet training programs are becoming censorship cultures as they're becoming more politically ideological. Pamela Paresky is going to talk about false assumptions in mental health that lead people to support censorship. The idea that speech harms people and things like that. And Brett Alderman has a really exciting talk about interventions that could help people who are self-censoring. How do you think about it clinically and what might help? The third talk is about cultural issues. I'm going to move quickly here. These are really, really fascinating talks. Daniel Burstyn is going to talk about authoritarian personality, really necessary right now in this political moment. Lucas Klein, fascinating talk on superego issues and ethics. There is kind of this is my take on it, so maybe would say it differently. There's um, among some social justice activists, there's a kind of horrifying empathy that they have. It's this boundless empathy, even for people who riot and murder and commit crimes and attack people. Uh, it's this kind of terrifying, total, no matter how vicious they are, they get empathy. And then there's an equally terrifying, total lack of empathy for other groups, no matter how much they're attacked, it never matters. And this comfort with even the most vicious behavior towards people in the other group. So there's definitely superego issues at play in our cultural moment that are really important. And then Christina Annarella is going to talk about humor and the mental health benefits of humor. There's some attempts to cancel comedians and jokes, and she's going to talk about how it can be beneficial therapeutically and in the culture. And the last workshop is about racial and cultural reductionism. Partly that's about therapists stereotyping patients, trying to fit them in the box, as opposed to engaging them in curious inquiry and seeing them as the unique individuals they are. Partly, the other talk by Mike Strambler is going to be about people who don't fit into a group, and either ideologically, religiously, racially, ethnically, culturally, and what that how they experience that. Their people are different and identify with different labels for different reasons and wrestle with these things. So I think that'll be a really fascinating talk too. We have a bunch of other workshops in process: gender normativity and couples therapy. We want to talk about the racial schema. A lot of this I was able to talk about. Here's our wonderful staff. I will not read their bios. Staff, these are our leadership. These are senior fellows, clinical director. These are the people building the institute and helping to launch it. This is the last thing I'll say here, because I know I've taken a lot of time already. This is the approach to therapy that we want to use. It's broad strokes, it's not the details, but it is that the goal is to provide openness where people can freely explore all of their concerns. The goal is to facilitate dialogue. Therapist and patient don't always have to agree, and they won't on clinical issues, on other issues, but it's about openness to talking about it. That's the thing. And not foisting an ideology onto patients. Not indoctrinating. Socio-political indoctrination is not something that we do. We see plenty of people reach out to us who are liberal, conservative, everything in between. Our job isn't to change your political views. And then skill. We really want to build skill on all the overlooked issues so that people have some understanding and comfort working with these issues. A brief note about child and adolescent care, that we will engage parents and explore issues with kids and not just take one side or the other. That's the talk. That's the summary. I raced through it all. There's more. I think as the Overlooked Issues report comes out, as our Substack gets going, as our workshops get going, our membership events get going, we'll have more of a chance to really unpack each of these. The thing that I'll say is each one of these gets more interesting as you go into it in more depth. When you really break down superego issues and how they're playing out in culture, it becomes more interesting. It's not a 2-minute talk that we could have hours talking about it and really unpacking how different people experience it, how it comes into therapy, what's happening there and why. These are interesting topics and they each deserve a lot of attention. I will say, the last thing I'll say is talking about what this work can do. We want to we really want to develop a team of clinicians and scholars that we're putting together through our members, through our advisors or workshop leaders. We really want to, through the Therapist Center network, we really want to have people who are very skilled in the variety of these issues, and can really branch out, and we could do workshops that are geared for patients or families. We could have resources online, retreats. We want to have groups. We want to run groups therapy for people who are interested in it. We could have expert witness testimony or consult or give advice to people who are active socially. We could have a variety of different things, consultation for organizations. So we hope to build all of those services long term, but this is where we're starting. So I want to open it up to questions. I'll stay a little bit late. It's not just an hour. I see one question. Are New York State CEUs available? We applied for continuing ed accreditation for New York State psychology, and we haven't heard back yet. We hope that'll be clear in time for the first workshop. It may not. New York State is unique in making, maybe New Jersey does this too, but New York State makes you, it's one of one or two states that makes all CE providers get specific New York accreditations. So you have to apply for psychologists, social workers, counselors, psychoanalysts. They're all separate applications with separate fees, and it's expensive and it's time consuming. We want to offer as many of these as possible. If you are a professional with a particular license other than psychologist in New York State and you'd like us to get it, let us know. We probably need to know that people are going to sign up for, that we've got 5 or 6 people who are going to sign up for a lot of workshops before it makes sense for us to get the accreditation. Maybe not. Maybe we'll just go for it. But it's several applications. So I'm sorry, we might not have your license there, but we will have psychologists soon. Where do you find the list of available workshops? Go to the website. It's opentherapyinstitute.org, and you'll get a box. Click workshop or go to the link that says workshops and scroll down, and it'll have each workshop, full descriptions available, date, time, everything will be available on the website. So opentherapyinstitute.org/workshops. Another question, will OTI offer discounts? Yes. Thank you, Michael, for asking this. Yeah, all workshops have a 30% discount now through August 16th, I think. August 18th. Let me check. Yeah, through August 18th. Anybody who signs up on any workshop will get a 30% off. So sign up early and you get that discount, then the discount's gone, you pay full price. If you're a member, you get an additional 10% on top of that 30% off. Any students who want to take it, it's basically half price. It's maybe not exactly, it varies for each workshop, but it's about half off. So you get half price plus all these discounts. So it might end up being, $20 for the students to take these. Other questions? Will workshops be open to non-therapists interested in the field? Yes, anybody can attend these workshops. And I will also say our goal is to have these accessible, useful workshops. I don't like jargon. I don't like difficult, impenetrable stuff. I like punchy, engaging, colloquial, understandable stuff. So we want the workshops to be that way. If you're not a professional, but you're interested in the field, please come, you're welcome. And I think that most of the time you should be able to understand the material and get something out of it, especially if you're a psych major or something. I think you should be fine. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, so if you're a student, be sure that you click the student registration when you register. You have to click that to get the student rate. Yeah, and if you become a member, you'll get the 10% off as well. Look, I want to thank everybody for coming. I think that's all the questions we have in the chat. But if you have more, you can always email us at info@opentherapyinstitute.com. I keep saying that. info@opentherapyinstitute.org. Email us or go to the website and hit the contact button, and we get all of those messages. So if you have other questions about discounts, workshops, offerings, media, other ways you want to get involved, just contact us. And please share this, share other material, follow us on social media, follow our Substack. We're going to announce everything on our newsletter, especially. So that's a great place, especially X and LinkedIn and our Substack. So please follow that social media. Okay, I think that's it for the open house. I want to thank everybody who came and showed up and watched, and being involved. Sign up for the workshops.